Hello again. This is Tom, and this is Tom's little compound. He landed here with his dog, Prudence, and some supplies 20 days ago. Since then, as you can see, he's been busy. In his little prison cell here is Rob, who will hopefully soon be joining Tom in his quest to build some sick tanks and dominate the local populations with them. You see, Tom thinks of himself as something of a road warrior. We're playing with them newfangled vehicle mods today, and we'll be using them real good. But we're a little ways off that yet. First things first, some basic rimworlding, which means killing this orc and stealing his pemmican before getting back to research. Because we won't get too far living off of a small rice farm and a wood-fired generator. Thankfully then, Rob has indeed been convinced to join, meaning we need to name the faction. I'm going with Maniacs. So, whilst he drags that orc back towards the base to be butchered and cooked, who is Rob? Well, for starters, he's a genie, and he also walks fast. So basically, he'll enjoy a hard life of building and crafting here at the gas station for roughly 16 hours a day for the remainder of his years. Very good. He'll also very often serve as Tom's maid, cleaning up after him. The two are primarily feeding themselves with hunting at the moment, since raiders aren't arriving in large enough numbers to sustain 2 healthy growing boys. That will change surprisingly fast though, because vehicles and their parts are quite valuable, and we'll start making some very soon. Preparing a simple garage and placing within it the all-important bench. With that, we'll start working on a simple dirt bike. Just something for the angry road warriors to vent their frustrations on, since they get antsy having not been at the wheel, or handlebars I guess, for too long. First though, piggies. A pair of them. One wielding an SMG and the other just running around with concussion grenades. Okay, well done guys. If there's anyone you can rely on to blast out their friends' kidneys, it's the pig folk. Off to the butcher block with you. Now, that little dirt bike is finished, so Tom can just jump onto it and play make-believe for a little while whenever he's getting upset. Also, we can paint it in a sweet woodland camo. With the colony's options for power generation growing thanks to the advent of biofuel refining, it's time we thought about making a fridge. Whilst doing that, some visitors got mauled by a local grizzly bear, so after putting down the offending Ursa, we got some free stuff, including the tech print for jump packs, which is nice I guess. So I may or may not have been distracted when Rob's brother crash-landed in the area, meaning that by the time I noticed him, he was dead. Oops. Well, Rob, pretty soon he'll very literally be your own flesh and blood. Maybe you can take that as some sort of twisted closure. A pack of man-hunting cats arrived and confusingly went straight for the dirt bike. Surprised they could even see it, given how well camouflaged it is in the snow. The boys rushed in to clear off the pack of eco-terrorist cats and rather predictably exploded the bike with their shotguns. And then its fuel exploded too. All over Rob. Tom valiantly reaches into the flames and drags him to safety, only slightly charred. But a lot of steel and components were wasted on that bike to learn the lesson that angry animals will go for your ride if it's out in the open. Alright, screw it, let's make an APC then. It'll take a little while to make all the parts since Rob is all burnt up, but whilst that's ongoing, we'll grab a couple of advanced components and some plasteel from an exotic goods trader for later. So shortly after Rob gets out of bed, feeling ready enough to take on the world, some Toxfolk arrive and despite not currently carrying a gun, he goes and stands next to Tom in the defense. For his efforts, he's shot in the leg. He'll be fine, it's just another day or two in bed. The next priority is reliable power generation. Currently, we're actually still relying on that wood-fired generator. The central part of the base is built right next to this Helixian geyser, so naturally we've researched gas extraction and we'll get to work on utilizing it with a pump and a room to fill with generators. Tom gets to do some target practice on a large group of manhunting tortoises, whilst Rob builds the APC. It's a highwayman, but we'll be naming this one Murder Truck, because that's what it'll do with its dual 7.62 machine gun turret that's capable of firing on the move. This is very overpowered, I'll show you in a bit, but first though, Seb has dropped from the sky. They're pretty decent, but will be paralysed for 34 days and will need converting. Honestly though, we've got plenty of food, so an extra mouth laying on the floor of the generator room isn't really a problem. The short-term goal at the moment is learning how to suck chem fuel right up from the ground to fuel our conquests. Speaking of which, my dark passenger is hungry, so Tom jumps into the murder truck, leaving Rob to hold down the fort whilst he drives to a nearby logging site and guns down a small gathering of essentially unarmed tribespeople. He'll tell you he did it for the logs, but let's be honest, we live in a forest. He did it for the kicks. We took a prisoner named Amber, one of the most ordinary pawns I've ever seen. We dragged her all the way home and then acted surprised when upon arriving, she was crushed to death under the murder truck. Oh well, we can still cook her. The gang needs components though in pretty serious numbers, and without fabrication or a long-range scanner, that means strip mining what little rock the map has to offer. We find a few patches of components, but then Rob, who's still upset about his brother, goes on a food binge, consuming a load of meals that are probably made out of him. Anyway, with microelectronics figured out, another pathway to components opens up. Trade ships. That'll help. As will a pretty sculpture in the workshop/dining room. Rob made it from granite, and it portrays the moment Tom disabled a tortoise in a cowardly, half-hearted way. An interesting piece, for sure, but unlikely to take any prizes. A component mining site has popped up on the world map, only containing 16, but that's 16 more than we have now. And it's hardly a huge effort for Rob to drive over there and gun down a few tribespeople. From this site we captured Armadillo, who miraculously didn't spawn directly underneath the murder truck this time. So we'll stuff her onto the floor of the comms room for now whilst we build a proper room for her. She did get an infection from the gunshot wounds, but she'll be fine. It's a character-building infection, not a deadly one. Those advanced components we bought earlier go into an advanced research bench, and then a group of impids find out what bullets feel like. And then Tom settles into a long stint researching deep drilling. There's oil in the ground here, and we want it. Armadillo went berserk and broke out of her comms room, so Tom shot her in the face, twice, to get her back into her cell. Speaking of which, she does actually have a half-decent cell now, so that's nice. If you want to be treated this nicely, smash that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment with a terrible Rimworld video concept, because you guys are so good at that. Anyway, in this nice cell, Tom can work on recruiting Armadillo, but before too long he needs to leave to put down a wave of mad alpacas, who've developed a frightful hunger for human hands. We had a couple of quests for information on a relic monosword, so I sent Rob in the truck to go check them out, only to then learn that he's incapable of intellectual work, which includes hacking these terminals at the quests. So once again, it looks like we just gunned down these tribespeople for fun. My bad. Back at base, we can finally build a ground-penetrating scanner and get looking for deep chem to refine. And then Armadillo is recruited and the gang throw a party. Which is really just Tom and Armadillo hanging out in the darkness thanks to a solar flare, whilst Rob is busy building a temple. But apparently solitude is exactly what they needed, because the two are immediately lovers. Must have something to do with how smoking hot Tom looked while he was gunning her down earlier. Anyway, this is convenient because it means that Armadillo's former prison cell is now a double bedroom. Very good. As we've got 3 colonists, we can also start doing ideology stuff. It's not particularly interesting in this colony, that's why I haven't talked about it yet. Their ideology exists just to make them okay with eating people and long for the thrill of driving, that's all. So anyway, as much as I've enjoyed the open-air situation we've got going on here so far, it's time to close this base off to the world a little bit, funneling raiders and wildlife towards what little defences we currently have. Just in time for some pigfolk to show up. There's no reason to let them approach the base though when we can just approach them in the murder truck. This thing really is very overpowered, but I still don't mind. The raiders should try bringing their own vehicles. It would help them out a lot. While we were dealing with that, Seb got up. Pretty early, I think he was supposed to be on the floor for another week or so at least. He'll be a bit tough to convert since he's a slow learner. You have to tell him why eating people is good over and over again before he finally gets with the program. But we'll get it done eventually. Now this is what the base looks like after 100 days here. It's not super efficient and it has some very strange rooms, but I think it has a certain charm nonetheless. Something else that has a certain charm is crude oil. and we've just found some nearby the base with the scanner. Before we can exploit this sludgy resource though, Toxfolk showed up. And after they're gunned down, toxic fallout coats the area in an interesting coincidence. So in the green fog we'll work on a pump jack for the deep camp. It's slow going though. The snow is super cozy and cute, but people sure do move slowly in it. Eventually though, the pumping can begin, pulling the good sludge into a holding tank up here within the walls. Now with a refinery and some chem fuel storage, the murder truck and its successors should be good and fueled for a very long time indeed. A quest from an AI in the sky arrives asking us to build a small structure for an advanced component and some jade, so of course we'll do that. Rob can have it done within a day whilst Tom is off harvesting more steel. But pretty soon we will have exhausted most of this area's resources, so it's time to look to another of these vehicles for salvation. In just a moment. First, Tony has crash landed here. She's pretty good at both crafting and medicine, which are both good things to have, so despite her being a recluse, it's into a fresh prison cell she goes. And now despite telling them to avoid it, the inevitable has happened. Armadillo is pregnant. Fine, we can deal with it, I just don't think that this is a very good place to bring up a child, that's all. Shortly after finding out, they get married. Must be one of those, oh shit, don't want to have a baby out of wedlock and upset the deeply religious grandparents kind of weddings, I guess. But a bunch of Mechanoids have arrived to crash the wedding party, since it's about that time, I guess. So let's see whether the murder truck, loaded with armor-piercing ammo, can handle these spooky robots. Initial experiences point to no, with it immediately set on fire by a Tesseron's laser, but after putting that out and re-engaging, it actually gets the job done pretty admirably. In case you were wondering, by the way, Seb is at 4% certainty after another ritual. So all we need is for someone to casually mention the virtues of cannibalism in conversation and she'll be good to go, which Tom does a little later. Good job, proud of you. Right, back to that vehicular salvation that I mentioned earlier. We will be building a frog. Yes, a frog. Basically a reusable cargo pod that can carry 240 kilograms of goods and a single occupant. Using them for orbital insertions to combat would be really cool, don't get me wrong, but we'll be using it pretty much exclusively for trading. After loading it up with human skin, silver and chem fuel, in Tom goes and off he flies to the nearest semi-advanced settlement to sell his wares. Look at it go, yeeting him across the planet. His skins and chem fuel buy him a healthy chunk of components, both regular and advanced. And just like that, he's home with his haul. I like this a lot, it's very cool. But it does highlight a need for some kind of cash spinning operation to support such rapid trading capabilities. Anyway, more importantly, Tony is trying to break out of her lovely prison cell for some reason, and not wanting to risk it with the shotgun this time, I have the now heavily pregnant armadillo pick up a log and go smack her about with it. Which didn't work. So we'll send in Rob and Seb to pistol whip her to the ground. She's surprisingly hardy, that Tony, but she does eventually go back to her cell. Raiders still aren't arriving in large enough numbers to support the food needs of the growing population, so I want to hunt some large game in a relatively safe manner. I had wondered before what's less ethical than hunting deer with a chain shotgun. Well, it's hunting rhinos from an APC, but it's inarguably very effective. So with the fridge full of rhino meat— nope. Alright then, okay, fair, that's on me. Perhaps we should build a roof over this interior area, especially if we're planning to keep tanks of flammable liquid out there. A group of orcs are quite handily put down by the murder truck alongside the turrets before Armadillo decides that it's baby time. Her and Tom gather for the birth, in their wooden tiger masks that they stole from raiders. I should probably start enforcing some kind of uniform around here, but whatever. Little baby Stanky is born. On uniforms, I had forgotten to give Tom his moral guide one, which is a cape and hood. Naturally, his are made from people's skin, and kind of make him look like a Jedi. The compound is growing a little to provide space for a more comprehensive workshop, since we've researched fabrication now. There are deep drills set up near the base for gold, steel and plasteel, so we should be set crafting our own components for the foreseeable future. In fact, now that Tony is finally recruited, that'll likely be all she does for a very long time. Sit at the fab bench churning out components. And she'll like it. or she'll get the log again. With this fresh inflow of components, it's time to advance the fleet a little. Having researched combat vehicles, we have access to some serious kit. I figured out what we can sell in the Frog, by the way. It was right under our noses the whole time. Chem fuel. So if we load it up to the doors with cans of the good stuff, basically making it a manned incendiary bomb, then in no time at all, we'll have loads of money. Before building any advanced combat vehicles of our own, we'll first restore this Udar to its former glory. But here are the orcs to put a hold on that. They managed to yeet a pipe bomb at one of our turrets, but are all murdered and turned into meals for the trouble. So anyway, mobile artillery. Our Udar will be known as Yeeter, for it yeets mightily. Unfortunately, it yeets 155mm shells, which are incredibly expensive, so it won't yeet very often. Now, I waited for this winter's snow to clear before starting to plan a new, larger entryway to the base that will better suit all of these new and shiny vehicles and keep them safe from raiders. But this was interrupted by insects rushing up from one of the deep drills. Insects in Rimworld are typically best dealt with using melee fighters. Murder trucks also work, it turns out. Some of the little ones did get at Rob, but he managed to sort them out with his gat. Now, where were we? Ah yes, the Okay, now we've got a mech hive raid, which includes a rather scary robot with a thermal bolt launcher, yeeting firebombs at our vehicles. After throwing quite a lot of ammo at its shield, I decided on a more direct tactic. Just run the damn things down. Okay, now, if I could get a moment, we'll plan this new section of wall. Shortly before it's finished, another large group of orcs shows up and catches Stanky out running around in the woods. So whilst little Stanky is bleeding out, the murder truck holds the fort by plugging the hole in the wall until the orcs are ready to flee, at which point Tom can step out and tend to his bleeding progeny. Alright, the vehicle bay is finally finished, but we will now need a new defensive setup. I don't want to make any kind of standard kill box for this base because the vehicles are overpowered enough, so we'll just point turrets out through embrasures and call that good enough. The first to test them are more mechs who've dropped randomly throughout the area, and realistically shouldn't be much of a problem. The murder truck has to go out and mop up any that are dug into cover too good for the turrets, but yeah, we're fine. Wait, no, we're not. Prudence is dead. Shot by a Minotaur. Tom couldn't save her in time. How sad. In this colony, Prudence, and only Prudence, is spared the butcher block. She gets a grave in the yard, for being a good dog. This is pretty much the final form for this base. What I want to do now is make some ruins with new and shiny combat vehicles. The first to be built is this, the Tango, which I've named Orange Soda and given the standard camo paint. It's armed with a 102mm autocannon. Very good. With advanced ammunition researched, I can make armor-penetrating incendiary and explosive shells for this thing, which I'm sure will be very fun to use against unarmored tribespeople. We will be bringing along all of our vehicles on this first run at least, including the newly restored refrigerator truck, which is mainly carrying the extremely heavy 155mm shells for the Yeeter. They weigh almost 50 kilograms each, which I thought was outrageous, so I googled it, and fuck me, okay, fair enough. I wouldn't want one of those dropping through my roof no matter what it's filled with. But I absolutely do want to put one or two through someone else's roof. So let's go do that. Getting this whole convoy onto the world map and then back into a settlement can be a bit, well, let's say challenging. These vehicle mods are in their early stages, so just keep in mind that if you plan on doing something like this yourself, you're seeing a very condensed version of events with a lot of the frustration cut out in order to make a good video. Got that? Okay, cool. Let's head to the nearest orc settlement. Yeeter sits this one out, letting the two APCs gun down the whole town whilst the return fire pings off their armor. No, it's not a challenge at all, but I assure you it still feels good. Okay, how about something a little bit more fair? Onwards to the nearest Imperial settlement, where we'll put Yeeter to use, blasting out walls and then laying some incendiary fire on the advancing Imperials as they run into our guns. Okay, that was very easy as well, even in the snow with all of our drivers complaining about the cold and lack of recreation. We'll grab what we can from here, including some nice and shiny Eltex gear, and go blast a tribal settlement into dust. Very good. Let's go home. The caravan arrives at base at just about the same time as a mech cluster, which is convenient. Unsurprisingly, they won't have too much trouble with it. So, as fun as that was, I suspect if I was just using the Tango alone, I would have had exactly the same result, with much less janky vehicle interaction. But I don't want to go out into the winter again. So we'll instead use the remainder of the snowy season to build something even worse for the locals. A Bulldog-class tank, which we'll name Woof, obviously. Once the snow clears, off it goes to the nearest Impid camp with its menacing dark paint job, because who needs camo when you have a 75mm main gun? Just as you'd expect, it does an admirable job, sending an HE shell right into the middle of town and finishing the rest off as they sally out. The tank, unsurprisingly, also wins versus orcs. So what about piggies? These guys do actually have a mortar, which could be a threat if they weren't just throwing smoke shells. And in case you were wondering, no, a shield belt will not stop a round fired from a tank. So after a little more of the same, the pigs give up and leave. I don't blame them. Okay, so who haven't we pounded to dust yet? Ah yes, the Itakin, of course. Unfortunately though, Woof is bingo on shells, so it will return home for now. Tom and Armadillo head back out in the Tango, a power couple if there ever was one, to burn some Wookiees to death with incendiary autocannon rounds. On the way we step on some more Imperials and steal their fancy persona weapons, a Calm Thoughts monosword and a painless plasma sword, very nice shinies, and in a surprise to literally no one at this point, the Wookiee settlements also put up very little resistance. Nothing but enemy vehicles would put up any resistance, so it's safe to say we've won at this point, but there's a rumbling back at base. A large quantity of bugs are coming up from the deep drills directly in the centre of the base. They detonate the frog, which then detonates the cans of chem fuel that were sitting inside of it. And, to be fair, the defense against the bugs wasn't going great anyway, but this has certainly sealed the deal. I mean, poor Stanky's head got blown straight off. Just popped right off in the blast. Everyone else is on the floor writhing in pain, cut up by insects and now also burning alive, aside from Essie, an old woman who joined the colony recently just as an extra pair of hands to hold a steering wheel. She can't move very fast, she's not a skilled medic, and now she's got 3 dying patients to look after, all of whom are rapidly developing infections. As you might imagine, this is a stressful situation, and before too long she's in the kitchen, stress eating. When she's finally done eating and starts treating, she collapses, exhausted, in a food coma, I guess. We've all been there. So, well, one by one, Seb dies, so does Tony, and last, but far from least, Rob. Here from the very beginning, dying alone in his room. Having let this happen, Essie grabs a load of food, jumps into a Humvee and fucks right off, leaving Tom and Armadillo to arrive home feeling victorious, to discover only death and ruins are left. They head to the rec room, Armadillo plays a presumably melancholy tune whilst Tom scrolls Reddit or something on the computer. We spent just over 250 days here, making this base and building vehicles capable of conquering the whole world, only to fall from within. It's kind of poetic, really. With that in mind, now might seem like an odd time to implore you to remain indoors. But, you know, still do that. It's not safe outside. Thanks for watching, and until next time, goodbye.